wonderful to be here. And yes, I've been studying esoteric sciences all my life, but have always known since I was quite young that Egypt was home. So it was no surprise to me that it wasn't, well, actually fairly, about 10 years ago that I ended up on the doorstep of this amazing man, Abdelhakim Awyan. And some of you might be familiar with him. You might have read the books by Stephen Mailer or seen most people have seen The Pyramid Code by Carmen Balter. What you may not know about Hakim is that he had university degrees in both archaeology and Egyptology. And one of the first things that he told me was the hardest thing he ever had to do is unlearn everything he learned at university to actually understand and really experience what is in Egypt, what's in plain sight that is not addressed by academia and these understandings of looking at our Egyptian heritage. And so chematology, if you don't know what this is, was an understanding of ancient Egypt developed by Hakim and Stephen Mailer to address these things that I'm talking about and we'll be talking about today. And the word chematology stems from the word kemet, and kemet comes from the hieroglyphs for the consonants KMT. And what it's really addressing is the black land, or it means the black land, and it's the black silt, the dark, alluvial, rich, fertile soil that was dumped by the Nile each year, annually, to as the floods came in. And this rich, dark soil is what gives Egypt its abundance and the ability to feed and will actually give us this heritage that Egypt left us, because this dark alluvial soil is what fed the people. But it's a much deeper story than that. And everything that I look at, you know, I'm a symbologist, or I've been called a symbologist. I've been studying it, as I said, all my life. And living in Egypt for almost 9 years now, my focus of study, of course, is Egypt. I've been traveling the world, and I see patterns. And these patterns all speak to the same thing, and it is the journey of the seed, and it's the journey of, you know, it's also the hero's journey that we talk about, and they likened every breath of life and the nature of our reality to the path of the seed, from the moment that we place that seed in the rich, dark, fertile soil, to it's nurtured, and it grows roots, and it reaches for the light, and when it finally breaks free and sees the light of day, we speak to all of these cycles, and it grows, and it finally bears fruit, and that fruit is harvested. And this is the journey, this is the hero's journey, and then you take that fruit, and what happens next? And these are the things that we are looking at, because the Egyptians and the ancients, and when we talk about this, we go back, way back to earlier cycles, because the foundation of knowledge that we get through Hakim and the indigenous worldwide is an understanding that we cycle through many different ages of levels of consciousness itself. Our understanding of our reality changes as we move through these cycles. And so we go way back to where they understood at such a level that they understood every aspect of nature and how each one is a fractal impression of everything else. And this is how they present their symbolism, as a holographic fractal patterning of the breath of life. And so one of my challenges when I'm looking at symbols and mythology is to take this, what I'm experiencing and what I'm seeing way back in time, and looking at it as it moves through these cycles, because the symbols, just like the sites, we look at the sites and we see the buildings are changing. Everything's changing with the civilizations. Over thousands and thousands of years, many different civilizations lived on the Giza Plateau, or we see temples below temples below temples. Even throughout Europe, you see the structures below the cathedrals, and it goes way down because they build on the same sites for a certain reason. It's the same with the symbolism. The symbolism, you know, when you go way back, and Hakim would have said this, you don't find symbols on the structures. When you look at the Osirian at Abydos, it's ancient, huge. Some of the blocks, megalithic blocks, go way up to 200 tons, but you don't find symbols on them because there was no need to express through symbolism. But when we see the dawning of symbolism, we begin to see patterns, but these patterns also change through cycles. So an understanding of a certain symbol, and even the swastika is a great sign of this because it can change through cycles of time. It's the spin, and it's the spin of the electromagnetic current. But depending on where you're looking at it, it can change your perspective of it. Is it good? Is it bad? What does it actually mean? Is it day or is it night? All those things change dependent on where you are and within the cycle, but also where you're standing, with where the direction of the light that is being cast on it is causing it to spin. And so I bring slides like this in order to have us jump out of the box to begin to see things the way the ancients actually might have seen them, because the symbols that you just saw, and all of them, have many, many, many different levels of understanding. And as I said, they move through cycles. And what they're trying to show us through many of them, and when people do come to Egypt, you mentioned we work with many people coming. And usually before we go into the temples, if I have the opportunity, I try and get people to jump out of the box and see the symbols. We look at them and they're in 2 dimensions, and we think, we're looking at something and we take it at face value. This is the 3D, the way we look at things. And I encourage people and challenge people to jump out of that box and start to walk around the symbols and to look at them from every different perspective and understanding. And as you can see in this slide, depending on where you're standing, this item, this form that's dangling here, can either be a circle or a square. If you're standing in front of it, you're seeing a square. If you're standing over to this side of it, you're seeing a circle. And only if you get up and walk around it, you get above it, you get below it, you circle around it. It's all the different perspectives that actually give you the understanding of the whole, that this is actually a cylinder. But is it more? And in my opinion, it is so much more. This is another slide to give you the understanding that not only, you can walk around an item and it looks and appears different, but also the angle of the light, the angle of the sun hitting this form will give us a different perception of what it is we're experiencing. So again, this is hugely significant if you understand what it is they're presenting to us. These structures, the symbols, everything was created in order to harness a certain understanding and a certain energy and a magnetic flow. And so with this slide, I'd ask you to look at the 2 upper corners, and you see images that give you flat concentric circles with lines in them. And if that's all you're looking for, that's all you will see. But these images can also be an exact reflection of what you see underneath. And oh, by the way, these structures could actually contain a movement within them, an intended movement within them. And then when you think, if time and space are vibrating and breathing, which our understanding is, everything that we're looking at, if it's alive, it has to vibrate. It has to be moving. And this is how we define time and space itself, through cycles of movement. So if this is the truth, how can we measure them by only observing a linear flow? Nothing flows in linear patterns. Everything bends, and so does time and space. So I think we need to take another look at how we define, perceive, and document historically time and space itself. Do we need to look at patterns, or are we trying to describe it with a 3D current day perspective? Maybe this is just a moment in time, and this is how we perceive the universe. And from my studies and my research, I am seeing that the ancients most definitely had a different, I'd like to say, higher understanding of what it was they were perceiving. And so they're offering us something. They're offering us the patterns to look at, to tell us where we are at and where we're going next. And yes, they also show a fractal imprint. You know, the symbol of the sun, the circle with the dot in the center, this is a well-known universal symbol of the sun. It's the self, it's the universe. But it also can be the symbol of the cell. And as you take that through time and space, it becomes, again, so much more. And so most people that have even dabbled in anything Egyptian have heard about this pantheon of gods and goddesses. And in grade school, I was told that, you know, the Egyptians worship many different gods, and, you know, and this is an accepted understanding. And it never really quite fit for me. It didn't make sense to me until I started to really do my research and, of course, meet Abdelhakim Awyan, who taught that this isn't exactly, see, even our labels are containers, and they confine us to certain ways of thinking. And we have these words, religion. Well, maybe religion didn't exist in the ancient times the way we perceive it today, and the term God might have meant something different, or we attach to the term God. And in truth, what the ancients, the Egyptians, actually labeled these aspects of nature, which are gods and goddesses to us today, netters, after the consonants that we obtained from the hieroglyphs, and the consonants are NTR. And these consonants give us the words, the Romans said nature, but they really give us the words, they're the root for the words eternal, nurture, nature, because what they really were aspects of nature, the nature of our reality. And when you start to see the flow and how they present them in the mythologies, they give us an understanding of how the flow of nature and the cycles work. And when you really look closely, it's I call it alchemy because it's not one science. You know, alchemy is an understanding that everything reflects everything else. And today we've separated out our education and our understanding of the universe into tiny little divisions. You know, astrobiologist and astrophysicist, and we're studying, you know, myopically tiny little fields of knowledge, and we've forgotten that all of these fields of knowledge are reflective of each and every one. And I think it's a call for us to bring these fields of knowledge, even if we bring all these experts in their fields of knowledge together, to take a second look at what it is that we're expressing in this nature of reality. It takes a village. It takes more than one understanding to really understand what it is, I think, that we're participating in this moment. And so the symbol for netter is actually, well, people argue whether it's an axe or it's a flag. It can be both, and there's an understanding for both. But it's fascinating that they use this as their symbol for something so important, and I will explain that in a second. And so to understand what I just have been speaking about, the Neteru, this pantheon of netters, we have 360 original netters. Now they grew out of one that becomes two and then three, and then they grow into this perfect circle of understanding the nature of our reality. 360 netters, there were 180 female and 180 male. And of course, this reflects the duality. Originally, the netters were both feminine and masculine, but then there's a division because this is what happens as we move through the cycles. And so even just to understand this a little better, I have this image, it's you can say it's Osiris, you can say it's the Initiate, and he's in between both Set and Horus. And this statue is in the Egyptian Museum today. And what you're really looking at is Horus is the sun, S-O-N-S-U-N, rising on the horizon. This is just one understanding of the depth. And Set, on the other side, where we get our word Satan, you know, the devil, is really just sunset. You know, day and night, two sides of the same coin. It's the polarity of us, of who we are. They understood that we have two sides. We have the up and we have the down, the right and the left. And in order to, again, understand what it is we're dealing with, we have to understand that everything is always happening in the same reference. So sunrise, sunset, with the initiate in between, when he transmutes this, it's when he's able to rise above this understanding of who we are. Over here, some of you might be familiar with SEKHMET, the standing SEKHMET. A lot of people think that the figure right to her, her right is also SEKHMET. They call it the sitting SEKHMET. Hakim would have called this Mut. It is SEKHMET. It's another aspect of SEKHMET, because every one of the netters holds an aspect of the whole. It's kind of an understanding that we all really breathe back into one understanding. And so SEKHMET standing, as you can see, she's standing in her power. So she's the active force of nature of what this feline represents. And Mut sitting, Mut meaning no need to speak, she's sitting in her power. I liken this to the FDR, comment, speak softly and carry a big stick. She sits in her power. There's no need to stand. She's passive power. And so it gives you an understanding of how they can be aspects of nature, of our nature. And each and every one of these netters, this is the Dendera zodiac. It's a pen and ink drawing of it you might be familiar with. It was found at the Temple of Hathor in Dendera. And what you're looking at is there's 36 netters, and each one represents a decan of a perfect year, 360 days. But you're really looking at, and each one can be divided into another 10 expressions. And each expression, each netter represents a day, all right, in a year cycle, but also in a great year cycle. Each one represents every aspect of the sun cycling through a year, through a great year, through a day. See, they understood that there's cycles within cycles within cycles, and each one addresses, again, it's a fractal impression of the whole. So you see, it's a whole different way of understanding. And looking into this, it can be mind-boggling, but it seems so complex, and yet it's so simple in its design, and it really helps one to gain a great understanding of what these ancients were capable of. We see the symbolism, this formula, being expressed throughout time and space itself. And this is an image that we get from the Cathedral of the Living Pillar in Georgia. And you see the sun in the center and everything revolving around it, because these are aspects, angles of light, if you will, angels. And that's what the netters, the gods and goddesses of Egypt actually represent. They each represent a different frequency, a different color, a different angle of light, a different moment in time and space, a different tone, a different sound. So you see, in understanding each and every one of them, you begin to understand that there are cardinal directions and cardinal understandings, angles. And you see, we go back to what Howard was speaking about. I'm a great fan of Howard Crowhurst. And these angles all are extremely significant because they represent archetypes of understanding. And so even when you look at, and I liken this to the angles of light, the angels, and you look at how we're often told about the archangels, these special angles, and angels, and you think Archangel Michael is already represented as the blue ray, this blue angle of light, which is an archetype, and he holds the sword. So just to give you an example of how this all works, this is all an expression of the nature of our reality. And again, you can see that when an angle of clear, bright light hits a prism or a drop of water, it splits off into all the different rays of color, and we can also liken these to, as I said, the archetypes. And each and every archetype is an aspect of yourself. We don't have to be confined to a label or a box of what we are. See, they teach us that we are everything, and we tend to confine ourselves to label. My name is Patricia, but I'm more than Patricia. If I just sit still in Patricia, then I confine myself to one expression of being. And so also, as you look at the symbolism, you start to see patterns in what they're looking at. And one of the things they look at is day and night. And you see it expressed everywhere. And day and night can be expressed in the sine wave pattern. You know, you move up and you're in the day, and you move down and you're in the night. And they're talking to the nature of how our reality flows. And so here we see the image of Nut and Geb and Shu, and they represent the sky and the earth and the atmosphere. And what you don't see here is that Shu and Tefnut represent the atmosphere. But see, there's form and formless. So not only is there day and night and sky and earth, there's form and formless. And you can't see the formless. And Tefnut, this is electromagnetism. Tefnut represents that force that we can't see. She's the feline. She's the geomagnetic current. And Shu, as you see, has his hands like this. He's lifting up the sky. The sky is the Milky Way. You know, we all have, in traveling around the world, I discovered that there are many indigenous traditions that speak about a time when the sky and earth were separated. And it makes one wonder, what could they possibly mean by this? But you know, life itself is an expression. If you're alive, then you're moving in waveform, okay? And what they're expressing is this electromagnetic nature of our reality. And so this is the symbol for Ka, and Ka is the life force. It is electromagnetic. And so this is what Shu and Tefnut represent. And again, you don't see Tefnut, but she's there. And so they knew, and they spoke to duality. They understood that in order to be alive, again, you have to be in movement. You have to be in waveform. And so we express in dual, polarity. And so this is spirit and matter, day and night, sky and earth. It's feminine and masculine. It's form and formless. You know, we only look at the form. We believe we are our physical bodies, but we're so much more. We exist in many different levels of understanding. And if we believe we're only our physical bodies, then we are limiting ourselves. We are being held hostage in a container that keeps us limited in the way we express ourselves. And then they go and tell us that, guess what? That everything that we think we're experiencing is all an illusion. It's Maya. In India, and I've traveled, as I said, everywhere. Not everywhere, I'd like to travel everywhere. But in India, you know, I discovered this term for the illusion of what it is we think we're experiencing. And it's Maya. And in Egypt, Maya means water. And what is it? But what does water do? But it flows in waveform. So it is the watery illusion. And I remember when I was a child, my dad we used to row me around the lake. We had lakes in our backyard, and we used to sing this endlessly. And now I totally understand, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And, you know, I went to Australia, and I met an amazing woman, Stella Wilden. And, of course, if you're familiar with the original people of Australia, they tell us we're just living the dream time. We are the shadow. You know, what's real is the space between the forms. And so back to when the earth and sky were separated. This gentleman that we see, this figure in the center, is called Heka. And as you can see, he's got the serpents, because it is the serpent that gives us this waveform, this earthbound waveform that is the sine wave, the sin wave of the expression of who we are. And he's got them and he's crossed them, okay? And what happens when you cross two waveforms? You create a portal. So that center point in the middle, what he's done is he's created a portal where our perception, if you understand vortexes, the perception of time and space changes. You have harnessed the energy of the current, and this is what Heka means. And you can see Ka is in his name, his hieroglyphic name, because what he's doing is and H itself represents what it is that separates the sky and earth. And H, as Howard pointed out to me, is the double square. See, everything is fractally expressed. They understood the nature of our reality to such a degree, it just is mind-boggling. So they're telling us right here. And then on his head, you see he's wearing a crown? That crown, what's on that sleigh on his head is the rear end of a lion. Just the rear end. And what it represents, we're going to address in a minute, but the lion, the Sphinx symbol, has a dual meaning. Because you have the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is you see it with the paws outstretched, but if you cut the Sphinx in half, the front of the Sphinx is the L, okay? Lion, L, left. But the back of the Sphinx is R. So the Sphinx itself is one of the few symbols in the world that represents two letters, and it's L and R. In China, they also have a glyph that represents L and R. And what it's addressing, according to my own research, is we're looking at the two spins of the polarity. They spin in opposite directions, opposing spins, vortex spins. And so he's addressing, this is the end. And if you're thinking the end of time and space, what does that mean? That's when you harness. This is when you find the point. This is when you find the portal. You've actually come to that resolution of polarity where all bets are off. And that's what the magician truly is. The magician, the magi, in the ancient times were the ones that understood the nature of our reality. They could harness the aspects of nature to create, to be able to manipulate our perception of what it is we're experiencing, and that's true power. The figure we see on the far left is an Egyptian goddess, Neter, called Megalithomania, and again, it speaks to the same thing. And what's really wonderful about her is the symbols themselves, and again, another basic. If you're looking at symbolism and you see something vertical, it's always addressing the connection between earth and heaven. And you see something horizontal, it's always giving you the expression of polarity, okay? Easy things to think about. And here she's sitting, at the bottom of her body is the serpent. It's earthbound, it's green, okay? It has a frequency. And then she moves up and she has wings. Wings always mean that you've risen above that earthbound state of being. And her hair is blue, and it's the sky, it's the Milky Way. So you see every expression of what we're experiencing within one figure. And she is known to be the personification of supernatural powers because she's harnessed, she's understood the nature of our reality. But let's go back to the beginning. In the beginning, in Egypt, they say there was nu, none, nothing, no thing. That's silence, that's the still point in the center. That's the primordial womb of unmanifested potential. Anything's possible. And then, from the innate friction of its own duality, its own polarity, it starts to breathe. In the Egyptian creation stories, Atum is known to be the creative force. He is the god who creates. Out of himself, he creates the universe. And in the creation myths, Atum first appeared from the infinite waters of Nu, nothing, the void, onto the primeval mound before heaven and earth were separated. He is the point. From his semen, he metaphorically creates the universe as the 360 Neteru. Due to the friction of his innate polarity, sound as thunder, the word of God, and light as the lightning, he breathes first breath. This is the first vibration of that sine wave. So they're explaining to us in this creation story the first breath of life from that moment of silence, the pause, okay? The flowing cycles of energy spiral into this illusion of form, which can be measured to define time and space, because at that point, there is no time and space. And time and space is measured, again, by the flow of a cycle. We measure time by the sun as it moves around our field of vision, and by the stars, by, solar and stellar movement. This is how we measure time. But what if there was no movement? And so here you see a tomb, and he's sitting on the sine wave. This is telling us, this is the understanding, this is life. He is creating, he is manifesting, and it is the waveform. Some of the essential characteristics of the torus flow process, because we understand this is life, this is how life generates. It is centered by a still point of singularity, has a central vertical axis of rotation, both receives and emits energy simultaneously, is self-sustaining and made from the medium in which it exists. And so we've described, as I said, we've described this process of the beginning of life in an alchemical formula. So original seed is H, the hydrogen atom. Atum is said to have created himself from the primordial waters of chaos or Nut. He creates Shu and Tef Nut, electromagnetism. This is that spark. This is the life force, the pulse of what we're experiencing from his saliva. And one becomes two, and I think we're all familiar with the Vesica Pisces, at least from this audience. And opposite principles control the life of the universe. This is what we're seeing. And so the netter, we're back to the netter as the axe or the flag. And an axe, what is the nature of an axe? What does an axe do? It doesn't cut something, it splits it. You split, a block of wood. And you're splitting, what are you splitting? You're splitting that atom, and you're creating the atomic energy that is the expression of all the netters, all these aspects of nature. And then there were three. But because my time is limited, I'm going to keep going. Because Shu and Tef Nut, I promised to speak about the Sphinx. And the Sphinx itself, Hakim told us, was Tef Nut, the spit, Tif, the spit of Nut. And my apartment in Egypt for the last 9 years is in a position right at the edge of the Giza Plateau, and I have a balcony that looks to the Sphinx. And so I would go out and have a cup of coffee and stare at this amazing sculpture, probably the first rock sculpture ever placed on the earth. Hakim said it was the first spit of Nut placed on the earth, his description, and wonder, how can this be? What is he talking about? He was so sure. You don't find this in any books. And it was my mission to figure out why and what this was. And I think I've come close. If I'm getting there anyway. But if we look at, again, this electromagnetics, the frequency that Shu and Tef Nut speak to, because they are twins, we see the wind and the moisture. We see that Shu is El, he is electricity, and Tef Nut is Ma, magnetism. And Tef Nut, related to the moisture, becomes related to the fertility of the flow of water. Okay, and again, their understanding of the Nile as this flow of water coming out of the mountains of Ethiopia and dumping the minerals and everything needed to create this amazing fertile soil. And so you can understand why they would choose such a symbol. But you see this symbol of Tef Nut literally worldwide spitting this flow of water. And I bring this here because those of you coming with us to the Chalice Well will see Tef Nut. And she's spitting the iron-laden water, the red water, which is the feline. It's iron water. And this is what it's representing all over the world. It's this great magnetic flow that it represents. And it becomes the sacred water that is coming out of the temples. You can see here, we see Tef Nut on the temples all over Egypt. And they used to have the sacred water flowing, usually in patterns, and it would come out from the tops of the ceilings of the temple, and the masses, those that were able to get that far into the temple, would be there waiting to drink this amazing sacred water coming from Tef Nut. It's the flow, it's the fertility of the waters that we're talking about. And so back to my story, I happened to read somewhere online, probably on Facebook, for the first time in all my life, and I absolutely adore cats, I see that someone says you should never sleep where a cat sleeps. And I thought, well, gee, I didn't know that. I grew up with cats sleeping all over my bed. And so I researched this further and had to figure out what this was. And I discovered from a medical website, and they say geopathic stress is natural radiation. And this is what they're attracted to, is the radiation. And it's described as something that rises up through the earth, which can cause magnetic anomalies created by subterranean running water, certain mineral concentrations, fault lines, and underground cavities. And I said, my gosh, they've just described the Giza Plateau. And who's sitting there? Who am I staring at every day but this amazing reclining cat? And so it began to make sense to me. And we're speaking, as I said, to the fertility of the waters. But I need to go faster so I can get you to the punchline. We don't want to miss that this is a waveform. This is a sine wave. And remember, Nikola Tesla tells us, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, you must think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. We see this serpent energy expressed in symbolism all throughout Egypt. And again, if I had more time, I would describe so many different examples of this. I include this just as a moment that you can see for yourselves what this serpent energy really is. I'm going to ask you, what you're actually looking at here, it's kind of hard to see, is this gentleman is about to drop two metal balls, and one is a straight path, and one is the sine wave path. Which one do you think is going to go faster? Raise your hands if you think it's the straight path. I've clued you in. Unfair. See for yourselves. This is serpent power. In slow motion, I'm afraid. But what I would also have you point out, I mean, there's so many factors that go into this, and I don't want to take the time to explain it, but look at this. This is amazing. But do you notice that at the peak and every nadir of this path of the ball, it pauses? Okay, at the top of every cycle and at the bottom of every cycle, there is a pause. We see this at noon, the sun pauses. We see this at the solstices. See, we will see this at the end and beginning of every cycle. And this is important because this is another thing that we're being led to understand and see. This, the Sphinx is sitting there to tell me that she's there not only to express something, but to tell us a message about what to expect. At least that's what I feel. And so she's pointing to something that may be happening in our future. And I believe that if we figure it out, we'll understand. Again, we're all feeling that something huge is about to happen. And I believe she's there to tell us what it is. And it's all in the pause. Or under the pause. And so my friend Stella in Australia, one of my favorite comments, and she was given the wealth of the Aboriginal or original understanding in Australia. And again, I wish I had time to talk more about that. But one of my favorite phrases that she uses, that the originals use, is, we are all just clever water. And back to that illusion, it is a containment of waveform in patterns. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's the patterns we need to be looking at. So all waveform spins, right? And it spins in many different directions, okay? And so the directional spin determines whether one side of a magnet will attract another. Opposite vortex spins attract. Like spins repel. So when you see the symbolism, and I'm just going to point it out, when you see lions or sphinxes or lions' gates, you see two lions facing each other, you're looking at the attraction. And when you're seeing them facing out, this is the repelling magnetic current. See, just these little hints as you're making your way around the globe and you're looking at the symbolism, you're beginning to understand what the different frequencies, the different temples were actually harnessing, what currents, and you begin to see more patterns. What we perceive as north and south poles are actually clockwise and counterclockwise vortex spins emitted by the magnet, and they create force fields. And they're fractal. So through my research, I came to this understanding, from all the symbolism that I see in Egypt, that our world exists as these two opposing spiraling spins. And the more I study it, the more I have a clear picture in my mind. And as I'm researching it, I stumble onto the work of Walter Russell. And I'm just amazed at what I think I'm discovering, but of course it's all been discovered before. There's nothing new under the sun, Hakim used to say. And at one point, that kind of made me a little depressed. What do you mean? I can't do something new and different? And I raised my hand and I asked him, and he said, well, it spirals. It evolves, and it also involves. And so what you're looking at here is an understanding of how everything emits. And it's only a three-dimensional structure. So we can't even imagine this in other dimensions of understanding. But even with our limited scope of vision, you can see that it's all emanating, flowing into and out of one central point, okay? And we have a field of vision, and that's where we are. We are the observer. We are the center. We are the self. We are the one experiencing form and formless in any given moment or non-moment. So creation occurs as twin opposing magnetic fields that spiral in opposite directions from one particle or body of light that vibrates, breathes, exhales, and inhales. Electrical sine waves of its mind through the heart's desire of consciousness to experience its imaginings. Some of you might have heard that before. This is a different way of seeing it. I see things in patterns. And so, if you remember my earlier slides, you remember I said you can look at things in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. Well, you see, here's the symbolism that has you looking down at the image I just showed you. The ancients understood the patterns of the current, and they knew how to harness them. And so the spiraling energy into a vortex generates from the center, as we've talked about. But you see it's breathing and it's emanating from the... Again, how can we measure time through linear patterns? But what we come to understand and what they tell us is the matrix, this outer shell of electromagnetic current, is our understanding of the mind, and the life force is its pulse. And remember, the life force is Shu and Tefnut. Taoist sage said, when there is no more separation between this and that, it is called the still point of the Tao. At the still point in the center of the circle, one can see the infinite in all things. See, we want to inhale into this self, into our centers. They say, look within, and this gives us a greater understanding of what that means, because that still point, why do we meditate? Why do we look for the stillness? Because that still point gives us the inspiration and the knowing. It's the static that keeps us in fractal, dismembered understandings of what we're experiencing. And so the more I came to understand the symbolism, the more I understood that these wings, this is Isis, Iset, and Nebhet, her sister. There's 4 twins, and they're all related, and we see Osiris also, the brother. And Isis and Nebhet have got Osiris protected by their wings, and these wings are actually the electromagnetic field that exists around the earth, around the sun, and around you, and around each and every life force organ within your body. Some people call these the chakras, okay? And this force field, again, it breathes, and therefore our perception of time and space breathes. And I bring this to light now because our magnetic field of the earth is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And it's starting to thin. This is the veil. This is the veil of Isis. This is the veil they say we're born into. They say that the electromagnetic field of the earth is protecting us from those great galactic rays. And yes, because we've identified with the physical, and we think we are our bodies, if those rays were to hit us, the radiation would kill us. But if we were to understand, to raise our level of consciousness, and the veil no longer existed, we would have those galactic rays of enlightenment. It would be a whole different process. And it's all based on our conscious perception of what we're experiencing. And so we've all, maybe not all, but some of us that love Egyptian mythology are aware of Thoth, Jehuti, more commonly known in Egypt, as consciousness. You know, he's known to be the wisdom, the record keeper. He's also the timekeeper. He's the astronomer because he's measuring time and space to tell us what our state of consciousness is in any given moment. And so Jehuti, or Thoth, thought, as the ibis bird, is wisdom from above. He's actually cosmic consciousness. He's the mind of the matter, okay? He gives us the tools for navigating the current. But he has another form, because he's dual as well. And he also exists as the baboon. And as the baboon, he's wisdom from within. We're back to that still point of knowing. And this, again, is Thoth as the baboon. So again, we can almost liken that to the two sides of our brain and bringing those two sides, those two understandings into one, transmuting the two to come into our knowing, the quiet, still place within. And this scene is on on the ceiling of Dendera as you first walk in. It's on the first floor. And I walk people through this floor because it's amazing. You see the two sides are separated into day and night. And Dendera is a place that holds all the secrets. And so as you walk in, you can see the cycles, the day cycle, the year cycle, and the great year cycle, all reflected within the same imagery. And you walk upstairs, and it's all contained in the Dendera zodiac that exists on a more three-dimensional diagram. But in the middle of this floor, on the first floor, in the middle of the ceiling, as you walk through all these cycles and you begin to understand the nature of our reality, in the end, she takes you to the center, the still point at the center, and you see these netters all walking into the Hathor mirror, because in the end, it's telling you that everything that you're experiencing and expressing is you. You're the I in the center. That everything you experience in the outer world is just your mere reflection. So you're creating it as you go. So this breath does not have to wait for 26,000 years or whatever you perceive to be a cycle. You don't have to wait. You have the opportunity to transmute your polarity in any yogic breath, because that's the vibration. That's the understanding of the current. This is how we harness the current. You don't have to wait. See? Sounds complicated, but it's not. This symbol that we see all the way on the right is called the Sema Tawi. It's one of the most ancient symbols you find in Egypt. It dates way, way back. Sometimes you see it, the oldest form of this symbol is what we see here. It's very basic, but later it gets icons and all kinds of symbolism surrounding it. We need more to understand it. But in its basic form, you're looking at the lungs, and you're looking at the windpipe, and you're looking at the throat where resonance is achieved. And so you're seeing on one side the papyrus and one side the lotus, and they represent male and female. Egyptologists will say it's upper and lower in Lower Egypt. And I say, of course, because this is also a polarity that we're addressing. And so it's telling you that within this yogic breath, you have the ability to move higher into states of resonance, higher awareness, or you can breathe into lower states of awareness where you are held hostage in a physical container, form and formless, and that there's no judgment. Why are we all here but to express ourselves within this game of the sine wave? And it's just a breath. This symbol up here in the far upper left-hand corner is called the mare, and it looks like an A, doesn't it? And it's a tool. It's a tool used by the ancient Egyptians for plowing the fields and seeding the fields. So we go back to the story of the seed, the hero's journey. And so here you see there's a hieroglyphic or an icon that shows you that the Egyptian is holding this tool to dig the path between the obelisks of the temple. It's the polarity, it's the center path in every structure of a temple where the polarity of the temple is divided, because you must experience both and bring it to center to understand the expression of what the nature of this reality. So this mare tool is showing him opening a path, because when we use it for plowing and seeding, what it does is it opens a path in that rich, dark earth for the water to flow, for the current to flow, the magnetic current. And so they're using this same tool to open a path in the center of the temple for the current to flow up and down the temple. And when we study the structure of the temples in Egypt, we find that they actually did build tunnels for water to flow, and not in straight paths, but in curvy paths, because this is what helps to create a field. And they're also built, these temples are built on specific meridians, because these meridians are aligned to certain events. And these events are affected by certain angles of the sun hitting this meridian. And this is how they learned how to harness the power. They use a certain combination of rocks and minerals within this temple, and the structure and the sacred geometry itself all combine to make these structures interact with your body, mind, and spirit as you walk through them. And so the term mare becomes our term from Mary. The Mary of the ancient tribes was the feminine, the female elder of the tribe was the one who held the wisdom. She had the knowing. She passed down the knowledge, and she also was the one who understood the herbs, the nature of the reality, in order to help with all forms of nurturing and healing. So this term Mary suddenly becomes a term we're all quite familiar with in our own common day religions or understandings. You know, Mary is the beloved. This is actually what this symbol means in Egypt. This symbol that plows the field for the nurturing of the plant is known as the beloved, because this is how they relate everything, this understanding of nurturing and healing, which is a feminine quality. And so you can look at these lines, and again, I don't want to go spend a lot of time with this, but our terms, even in our ideologies of Mary and Mary Magdalene, look at the term Mary Magdalene. We're looking at a magnetic current. We're following a flow. I'm not saying that the original, the understanding, it's an understanding that is fractally patterned, even in the expression of a life lived. And so this is Hathor. And Hathor herself, as a symbol, explains almost everything I'm talking about. Okay? She is known to have said, I am the Alpha and Omega. I am all that is, was, or ever shall be. And she is all that. And if you look at her, her hair itself is the Omega symbol. And it's also the Milky Way. And her face is ambiguous. It's male or female, because it is the Alpha, it is the seed. And as the seed, it's that seed of potential. This is the hieroglyphic for Hathor's name, and it's Hathor, okay? It's the place of the whore. The whore is the falcon, and this we understand is Horus. She's the place of Horus. There's many understandings of this. She is the womb that holds the seed of potential, which is Horus, who is a symbol also of this hero on its journey. It's the seed. And of course, this symbolism moves into something called the Shen and then the cartouche. But what's really exciting is when you look really closely at the Dendera zodiac and you go straight to the center, where you see Taret, you might be able to see the great hippo. She is Ursa Major. She is the Big Dipper of that spin that we look to. We look to the North Pole for our understanding, the northern hemisphere perspective of the cycling of our planet at this point. And so this is Taret. She is the North Pole, and we're looking at the circumpolar stars that begin this journey in the age of Cancer, where we begin to measure time and space. This is where the calendar begins. And we see this dog riding what? He's riding the mare. because this is where the breath begins. And the breath begins. This is a magnetic, electromagnetic flow that we're experiencing. And so this is the beginning where not only we measure time and space, but we need to speak with each other a language. And so this becomes the alpha, the seed. And we can see it as the letter A in our alphabet. It's all related. The dog is actually, many would say, Anubis, but it's Whippawat, because Whippawat comes from the formless to open a path for form. And this is the creation of form, the breath of life. Anubis is actually the path opener for us to move back into the formless. So he's the dog of form, opening a path for the formless. They always saw two sides to every expression, the duality. And here you see Taret again. And of course, she's holding the poles, the mooring posts for the spins. And in this image that you see on the far right, this is an image I took in a temple that's locked. I was lucky to get in at one moment when the keeper had the key. And this image is so powerful because you see Taret as an expression of the northern hemisphere, and she's facing Mut. We're back to Mut again. And Mut is an understanding of the southern hemisphere, because the Egyptians knew everything going on in the southern hemisphere. In fact, the underworld never meant hell. The underworld meant the view from below, the southern hemisphere. This is what they understood. And so you're looking at the Simatawi in between, the breath of life into and out of form. And at the top you see the Har again, Horus. He's harvested. He's in his expression of finally meeting that harnessing of the dual forces of nature. And here you see the opening of the mouth tools. What mouth are we talking about? But that northern polar spin, because the tools themselves are shaped in the forms that we see in the north and the southern hemisphere. This is the Big Dipper. And that's the opening of the mouth. This tool is used in ceremony every time someone of importance, the king or the pharaoh, dies. The tool is used to open the mouth for the spirit, the formless, to be released. It's beginning to give us a map of something really amazing. The analema, I discovered this as I was looking closer at what Taret is standing on. She's holding the Sa. Sa is known to be the birth of. But the Sa itself is an expression of the analema, known to be a tool of alchemy. And of course, the analema, those of you who have studied it, is the path of the sun. If you were to take a picture of the sun at the same moment of the day, every day for a year, it gives us this beautiful infinity symbol. And within this symbol, this container, you see again moments. The design of it, the geometry of it itself is telling us about the pauses, the solstices, the equinoxes. It's the container of how the cycles move. And as you see, it never stops. There is no end. We do not die. And so here are the two female netters creating the world grid. And as you see, each one of these are the 8 Agdad, they're the creator gods in one of the creation stories. And they're all holding the mirror, because this is the opening of the path for the electromagnetic flow of what it is we're experiencing. So when we talk about, and I bring all this to light because they understood the magnetic grids. These things are, these geomagnetic paths, these telluric currents, these currents that we're dealing with above and below the earth, these are the paths of fertility. These are the paths that the ancients were navigating because they understood how it interacts and how it helps to create a fertile environment for us to thrive in. And so I would ask, are we mermaids and mermen navigating these currents? Well, of course we are. And so I'm not going to go into detail about this. I think Freddie Silva is going to be giving a talk, and he speaks quite a bit about this. But these are the currents. These are the currents that we're looking at. This is the serpent power. But this is extremely important because the question is, where is Horus? We ask ourselves, where is Horus? And what we're really asking is, what hour is it? Where is Horus? Where is the sun? Because this is the most important thing. Where is that ray of light going to hit? At what angle? These currents continuously move between sunny and dark sides of the Earth, toward the equator on one side of the Earth facing the sun during the day, and toward the poles on the night side of the planet. So what hour of it, this determines the angle, this determines the strength of the power of the ignition of the current. You want to know when that moment is, because that's the height of when you want to harness its energy. So horizon, Horus rising. These lions that are back to back, okay, so they're repelling current. These lions are called the AFRA, the twin lions, named Dwaj, yesterday. And on the other side is Sefer, tomorrow, okay, with the hieroglyph that symbolizes the horizon in between. But what you're really looking at is when they move out and they meet, you're actually, when yesterday meets tomorrow, where are you? You're the vortex of no time, no space. What is the end of the world? What is the end of time? But moving into another state of beingness. And so I bring up the Aztec calendar, and I'm not going to talk about it very long, but I see an image in the center that I recognize. And we know it is Bes in Egypt. And it's this image of well, some call it the ogre, the monster, whatever you want to call it, with his tongue out. But what he really represents is he's the end. Okay, we can think of that as something bad, but in essence, the Egyptians have another figure that it represents. It's called Nebuger. Neb is the gold. And Nebuger, the image in the center on the far right, is actually the supreme being. That is harnessing everything. That is gaining your wings and inhaling back into center. So that is exactly what we're looking at with the Aztec calendar. And if you look at the path of the current, of the cycles on either side, they come together to form two faces. And those two faces form the image at the center, because this is how current and the cycles of time move. And what you see with this tongue hanging out in this expression, and you see it in Bes. This is an image I took in India of one of the temples, the breath back out again. This breath is the next breath of the next cycle, because we continually cycle into and out of the end of time. So the pause is just that moment before we begin again, like any winter solstice. And so through my studying of Tefnut, sitting in front of me off my balcony, I began to think about the radiation and the alignment, because Tefnut is aligned. She's aligned with what? The pyramids, but so many other sites all over the world. And I begin to take a look at what that could mean. Is this a path of fertility? Well, of course it is. And so I started to study. You know, when I went to grade school, I was only told there was a geographical equator and a geographical grid. But something told me there had to be so much more. I knew there were magnetic currents and geomagnetic paths and geomagnetic poles, or magnetic poles. But what I didn't know is there was a magnetic equator, and so I Googled it. And to my delight, I found out there was a magnetic equator. And it moves. Right now, it's way down it's south of Egypt, and it runs right through Ethiopia. And this is important. And the other thing I find is the king's lists. The king's lists are all over the world, and they talk about all these rulership. Well, what is rulership? What is a ruler but a measurement of time and space? We look to someone outside ourselves to define the measurement of our borders of time and space. So these kings, from my research and my understanding, these kings lists, their labels, are actually telling us of a movement between cycles of consciousness and how we perceive time and space. And so these are the early pre-dynastic kings that we see in the Syrinx. And each one has a whore on top of it, okay? And this whore is understood to be the power of God, okay? It's the power of this electromagnetic current. And so what we're actually beginning to see, and I see these signs, and we see them in obelisks all throughout Egypt, and we see these kings lists, and as we move into the dynastic times, it becomes contained in the cartouche, but every king has 5 labels, And one of them is the Golden Horus name, okay, which would imprint the same idea that we're looking at here. But each one of those 5 labels addresses one of the 5 cycles of the Cometian understanding, very similar to the Mayan and to the Vedic cycles of time. But anyway, this Horus name is actually, again, where is Horus? So they're telling us there's a path. And what we've been following, I have a geologist on my team, Susan Moore, and we're taking a look at this path of the current from a geological standpoint and where it moved and how they were harnessing its current throughout Egypt. And here's a beautiful symbol because we're back to the lion again, and you see this lion, these 2 lions, and they're carrying the seat of power, and it moves, okay? And this is an early symbol of the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant, if you think about it, is an ark, an arcing, and covenant means coming together. It's a coming together of 2 very powerful lines. So when you're looking at magnetic equator, you have to wonder what else would be involved with this. There has to be another line. And so here you're looking at a map of Egypt, and when we talk about magnetic equator, what would it be dividing? Is the division between the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere truly a division that we can determine from a geographic line, or is it from a magnetic line, the magnetic equator? And so Upper and Lower Egypt, from my understanding now, is this path. It changes. That division, that line, is a magnetic equator that was dividing Upper and Lower Egypt, our southern and northern hemisphere. And this is what the Shamsu Hor were really following. The path of the Hor is where this line is moving. And so, as I said, this magnetic equator, in this understanding, with the Earth off its axis, is actually way down in Ethiopia. And where do they say the Ark of the Covenant is now? But in Ethiopia. And this line is not contained in its beauty because it's in this state of separation, and it's in its state of chaos. But what would happen if we were standing straight up and down again, if we aligned our bodies again and we were breathing in a more harmonic state? Then the line would have been something similar to what it was in ancient times when Egypt was lush and rich. What I find interesting is at these places where the line is now, and I went to a site in India, and the same story there, by the way. I found the path of the current in India, and it ended up right now at a site called Chidambaram, where they have a temple that's dedicated to ether, the formless. And they have images of the swastika here. And also there's a different understanding in India. The Tamil Nadu has a totally different understanding than the rest of India. It's like the southern and the northern hemisphere. And they even have other symbolism that you look at, like in that area in Tamil Nadu, the symbol for the moon is the rabbit. And what do we see in the southern hemisphere but the rabbit in the moon? And this is something I also see in Egypt. There are places in Egypt in the Temple of Hathor where you see Wenet or Wenis, the sitting rabbit, facing Taret as the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. But everything changes when we're off our axis. Okay. Well, that's as far as I get. So if you want to know more, come to Egypt. Egypt is amazing. I'm working on a documentary. I don't have any books out now. I am working on that. So much material, there was no way I could get finished today, but as I said, look forward to more information coming out, and that's it. Thank you.